what happens when you try to capture the nostalgia of a beloved classic survival horror in the form of a spiritual successor. Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you my review of the Callisto Protocol. Striking Distance Studios developed this game with Krafton acting as publisher, releasing it in December 2022. If you're a Humble Choice subscriber, then you would have received this one in the April 2024 bundle. This survival horror title had a lot of hype building up to its release, primarily because it harkened back to the original Dead Space. And with good reason, because Glenn Schofield, the man behind Dead Space, was also the man in charge of the Callisto Protocol. Despite this, the game never really made its mark in the same way the older title did, and was received with mixed reviews. After playing the game, I could see why. Starting off with the game's presentation, this is easily the strongest point the Callisto Protocol has. It's graphically very impressive and boasts excellent lighting to really set the mood of each of the various levels. The character models look great, capturing the likeness of the actors playing them really well, and with the animations, it's fairly obvious that a lot of work was put into the mocap and making sure each animation felt impactful and seamless. Or particularly gruesome with the kill animations, especially the ones that end with the main character's, Jacob's, death. These were sickeningly gory in a good and squeamish way, and I'll admit, I think I did look away a couple times after seeing a death animation one too many times. The monsters also looked decent, but I didn't really feel they were anything interesting. It's nothing we haven't seen before, and they definitely aren't even close to being as memorable as the Necromorphs from Dead Space. Throughout the game, weapons could be upgraded, and I appreciated the extra length they went to make the upgrades visually apparent on each weapon. Or every weapon except for the baton, which I didn't really get, especially since melee is going to be the main choice when dealing with enemies. Outside of the graphics, the sound design was stellar and helped make each level immersive. The cast of characters were also really well talented, and I think each did their best to work with what they had.
I'm sorry. I tried to protect you. You didn't deserve this.
Danny. Hey, Danny.
Get away from me!
Okay. Okay, hey.
I'm sorry. I'm okay.
Be sure.
Overall, if you were coming to the Callisto Protocol purely because you thought the game looked good, and that's all you cared about, well, I don't think you'd be disappointed. But that's probably not the case. The story starts with a somewhat interesting beginning. You play as Jacob Lee, who is a space trucker essentially. Delivers cargo with his buddy, and this particular job is supposed to be the last one, because of a big expected payout in the end. Unfortunately for him, and even more unfortunate for his friend, their ship is infiltrated by the Outer Way, a supposed terrorist group in the sector. In the scuffle on board the ship, Jacob has to make a crash landing on Callisto. Upon landing, he is immediately clamped in irons and sent to the very prison he was delivering cargo to, Black Iron. From there, a device is grafted onto the back of his neck, and when he comes to, the prison is essentially in disarray because, surprise surprise, monsters are killing everyone. But of course, you don't know why, although, as a player, you could probably guess. And while the story develops some groundwork for character backgrounds, some political intrigue of the terrorist group attacking big corporations, and the mystery of Black Iron Prison itself, it doesn't really do anything with it all for a long time. By about mid-game, I was surprised to find that it really doesn't expand on any of those points in any meaningful way. Sure, you could find some voice recordings that eke out a sliver of info, but that's really it. I get that Jacob wouldn't really understand what's going on and would just be trying to survive in the messed up situation he finds himself in. However, from a player's perspective, that's just not enough to make a compelling story. Characters throughout feel really underutilized, and their writing doesn't really do them any justice. The moments in dialogue between characters tend to be more of, "What the heck is going on? I don't know," or go do this thing, Jacob. I feel that you learn next to nothing about the characters up until the very end, and honestly, it's not much. Now, I'm about to jump into some massive spoilers for the story and a bit about the end, so skip to the next timestamp to avoid them if you don't want to hear it. Okay, so first, going into the characters, you have Elias, a Black Iron prisoner who's been there a long time. When Jacob first met him, I was a bit wary because, well, he's a prisoner. What's he in here for? Throughout the first section of the game, Elias helps you and knows a lot about the prison and its systems. Like, way too much information. I had no idea how he was manipulating the prison systems, and started to wonder if he had been someone who worked in the prison at one point. Well, if he was, then you'd never find that out. The only thing we do find out is that he had killed someone in self-defense, wanted to make up for what he's done, and then promptly dies unceremoniously before he gets a chance to flesh out his character in any real way. Then there's Danny, the leader of the Outer Way, and the only other who survived the crash landing of your ship when they attacked it. She's got a beef to pick with you because you tried to kill her when she was the one who boarded your ship.
Didn't expect to see you again.
Oh yeah, why's that? Huh? You left me out there to die?
And you tried to kill me back on your ship. Guess that makes us even.
Look, I don't know if you noticed, but things have kind of gone to shit out there.
But don't worry, you won't see her for a long while after the intro anyway. And when you do see her, she basically just tells you not to trust Elias. Why? I don't know. I guess just because he's a prisoner? I thought that maybe she knew him, especially since he was the one who had us break her out in the first place. But no, that's not the case at all.
Thanks. I'll take my chances. A word of advice, though? Don't trust him. He's not what he seems.
When you do finally start working together near the end of the game, you found out that she believed you to be smuggling bioweapons, which caused a breakout on one of Europa's colonies and caused the death of someone close to her. She finds that you were just delivering medical supplies, and maybe you're not so bad after all. There's a couple other side characters, but really, those are the main two. Other than that, you have a doctor who wants to right her wrongs, a prison guard who basically becomes a monster trying to kill you and loses any characterization after the opening minutes, and the warden of the facility. Okay, so now I'll take the time to reiterate, I'm going to spoil the ending, so if you don't want to hear me talk about that, here's one last chance to skip ahead. Okay, so the big twist, which wasn't really that big at all, is that, surprise, Jacob actually was smuggling bioweapons, and that inadvertently caused the death of Danny's sister and everyone else in the Europa colony. However, he has actually been locking that memory away as a way to avert any feelings of guilt. Obviously, seeing that this affected Danny, this makes him see the consequences of his actions fully. As far as big reveals go, it was alright. But the story telegraphed it way too early that it didn't have the same impact. Although, the biggest problem is, as stated before, it's hard to care about these characters when they don't give us much to care about. As far as to why there is an outbreak in the prison, well, that's because of the crazy cultist warden trying to improve humanity through forced evolution.
Watching people die for fun, is that your protocol?
No. You are mistaken, Mr. Lee. The protocol isn't about death. It's about life. Our future lies out there. Our destiny. But we were not built for life in space. This
I
fragile shell
don't know.
holds us back.
It's okay, but I can't help but feel like all this stuff was written on the wall, so there really was no real payoff by the end. Not to mention, some of it mirrored Dead Space's own story with the cultist church. While it's been some time since I played Dead Space, and I could be remembering the story nostalgically, so maybe it wasn't really that good, but I'll leave this section with one last comment. I'd argue that despite Isaac Clarke, the protagonist in Dead Space, not speaking at all during the first game, he still had much more characterization than Jacob Lee did in the Callisto Protocol. Right out of the gate, we already understood why Isaac was going to the Ishimura to figure out what happened. he had a missing love interest who was on the station, and was also an engineer who could actually help with the repairs. With Jacob, all we know is that he transports goods and apparently takes any job if the pay is right. We don't really understand any of his motivations, and even by the end, we learn virtually nothing about the person we've been playing as for the last 12 hours. Unfortunately, things don't really improve for the game when talking about the gameplay. Largely, the Callisto Protocol does nothing to break the mold, and I'd say follows in the footsteps of other games, especially Dead Space, rather closely. Don't expect to have much exploration in this game, but I feel that's fairly common in many horror titles. The levels here are largely linear, with some having side passages that almost always lead to more supplies before wrapping back around to the main path. Sometimes you could find further clues to the story in the form of audio notes, but I was actually surprised with how few of these there were given the story was so light. One thing I liked was the tactile UI in the Callisto Protocol being one returning feature of Dead Space. Being able to see your inventory as screens that Jacob interacts with, or seeing at a glance the health indicator on the back of his neck was neat. I like the immersion it adds to the game, and I really like when games use these types of UI elements in general. Obviously though, a large part of the game is combat. I'd say this is where the game tries to separate itself a bit from its Dead Space roots. To its own detriment though. In Dead Space, at least in the first half of the game, careful aiming of your gun was crucial in order to dismember limbs. This led to tense but fun combat scenarios where you need to be careful with your shots and restrain yourself from firing wildly. In the Callisto Protocol, well, you're gonna be smashing things a lot more than shooting them. The game does give you a pistol early on, but it seemed almost useless. The game shows you how to use your pistol, and it took me almost the entire clip to drop the first enemy you encounter with. A little later on, the game teaches you about a pistol combo you can shoot right after a heavy melee attack. I used that for a while, but found out that just following up with another melee attack or two was almost always more beneficial to me. This experience suggested to me that melee was the way to go, so I didn't bother with any ranged weapons for most of the game. I did start using the guns by the end, but this was partially just to actually try them. And because by that point, I had many of them almost completely upgraded, which made them much more viable. In fact, I'd say that they are probably a requirement for the final boss fight. Anyway, in the beginning though, I instead spent any credits I had to upgrade my stun baton. Once you have some upgrades and learn the simple combat system, well, it makes the game ridiculously easy. Although, only sort of? Well, first, I'll explain the combat. With melee, you can light attack, heavy attack, and dodge an enemy's attempt to murder you. To dodge, you just need to move the analog stick in a direction, and you'll automatically dodge. Yeah, there's no timing, just make sure you don't do the same thing twice in a row, otherwise then you'll get hit. This really threw me off at first because I kept trying to time the dodge. However, once you have the rhythm down, it becomes a non-issue. You can even unlock an ability later that lets you follow up with an attack combo on a successful dodge, making the combat even easier. Although, I say all this with a bit of a caveat. Originally, I started the game on normal, and things were alright for the most part, until I got to one particular encounter early on that threw me through the ringer. The problem is because dodging enemies doesn't prevent other enemies from hitting you from the side, or behind, or shooting you from afar. And you really don't have any defense for that. Not to mention, on normal, these enemies can take a real beating before being dropped. If I'm expecting a challenge, well, then I don't mind it. But I don't really care for that kind of frustration in a horror game, as I feel it cheapens the horror elements of the game rather than accentuating them. After that, I turned the game down to easy, but still found some encounters to be challenging, but everything was much more manageable. But anyway, I guess take my thoughts on the difficulty and it being easy with a slight grain of salt because the game was literally on easy. I thought about setting it back to normal, especially after finding out I could smash dead enemies for items and health pickups about halfway through, but I decided against it solely because I wasn't really enjoying the game that much by that point and didn't want to prolong my time with it. Oh, and I almost completely forgot, but there is a telekinetic device as well, very reminiscent of Dead Space. I'll admit that I didn't use this at all other than to get out of reach items. Perhaps this is the edge that is necessary for higher difficulties. In fact, I'd almost bet on it, but it is there nonetheless. Stealth was another thing that felt pointless to me as well. Every time I attempted to use it, I was always spotted other than in sections where stealth was encouraged. Once again, I wasn't sure if this was my own problem or if it was the game purposely making stealth only viable when it allowed it to be. One thing I really disliked was the overuse of QuickTime events, especially when they happened in combat. Many times an enemy could get a hold of you and you'd have to mash the button to get out of their grasp. It was a bit infuriating because it was a guaranteed loss of health that I had no idea what triggered it. I wasn't sure if it was something I was doing wrong or if it was just random. Although, at other times, it became painfully obvious when they were going to happen that I was already mashing the button before the prompt appeared. I feel that sense of expected anticipation stretch across the whole game with the many horror tropes they use. I'll be honest, I've probably played too many horror games and have watched too many horror movies, so it was easier for me to see what's coming, but it got to the point fast where I'd be entering a room or turn a corner and think, oh, this is where the body is going to be dragged off, or, and cue the lights flickering out, or, this room is really foggy, guess a monster's going to jump out at me. While this could just be a me thing, I felt the horror elements were lacking and easily telegraphed so that even the jump scares didn't get me. And that brings us to the value and my final thoughts. But first, if you're enjoying the review or found it helpful, then please consider giving it a like, as that helps me out greatly with the YouTube algorithm gods. The Callisto Protocol runs for $59.99 USD, and I put about 12.5 hours in one playthrough. So first off, I would never pay that much money for such a short game. Yeah, I know the length shouldn't matter compared to gameplay, but I'm cheap. I'd rather spend $60 on a game that's going to give me a lot more mileage, and I pretty much never spend that much money on a game these days. That being said, the Callisto Protocol just isn't worth the full asking price. Visually, it's great. Gameplay, Story-wise, And even as far as the horror aspect goes, it's just not that great. Gory? Oh yeah, definitely. But scary? Not so much. Although, that will definitely depend more on you and how easily scared you get. And I suppose how many horror games you've played. As far as replayability goes, well, there are some different modes to play the campaign, a mode that is all about combat, and a new game plus. So there is some more content for those who really do like the game and want more. Additionally, there's the Final Transmission DLC that concludes the cliffhanger ending for the game. Although, be warned, without getting into anything, the ending is a bit dividing on how people took it. I think I'd only recommend playing this just to see what could have been if they had just pushed a bit further. Supposedly development was rushed, and that may be the case. Although I think the fact that the Callisto Protocol's DNA was too close to Dead Space, along with the Dead Space creator at the helm, made the comparisons too easy to make. Nostalgia is a hard thing to live up to. It probably also didn't help that the Dead Space remake released soon after, which in hindsight probably was a big mistake on Krafton's part. Obviously, this is a game to grab only on sale, and only if you're still interested in playing the game for yourself, despite everything that's just been said. Luckily, if you're watching this now, Epic is giving away the game for free until August 30th, so check that out. You can't beat free. If you played the game, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't, then let me know if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.